Hello, everyone. I'm Connie George from Carnegie Science Center, and I'm here with David Bayer. He's the initial organizer of the Westinghouse Park Second Century Coalition. David is a longtime area resident. He was a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette travel writer for a decade and a creative force behind the Traveler's Journal, a series of audio postcards heard daily on public radio stations across the entire country. He also produced and hosted other public radio series, including A Century of Heroes for the Carnegie Hero Fund and Dinosaurs and More for the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Today, we're talking with David about George Westinghouse. David lives near the site of Westinghouse's home in Pittsburgh and has expert knowledge of the Westinghouse legacy. David, last month marked the 174th birthday of George Westinghouse. Most of us have heard of him, that he founded an electric company, that he became an international enterprise that employed lots of people in Pittsburgh. But George Westinghouse was an inventor and an innovator, someone who actually embodies the values and mission of Carnegie Science Center. Can you fill in the blanks for our audience?
Well, Connie, thanks, and hello to your viewers. Actually, George Westinghouse was indeed a key player in the development of AC electricity in the 1890s. Systems and equipment invented by him and Nikola Tesla, among others, to generate, transmit, and use AC electricity illuminated the world. After lighting the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and then harnessing Niagara Falls to generate and transmit AC power, Westinghouse equipment ushered in the age of electricity. But electricity wasn't George Westinghouse's first world-changing triumph. He was a seminal figure of science, technology, and industry. 2 decades earlier, as a then 23-year-old Civil War veteran, George Westinghouse revolutionized transportation with his invention of an air brake system to stop trains. And this is the first train that carried the Westinghouse system. That was followed by automated switch and signaling systems to keep trains from crashing into each other. Then, in the mid-1880s, Westinghouse's vision and inventions for, did I skip a slide here? Yeah. Then, in the mid-1880s, Westinghouse's vision and inventions for the safe production and distribution of natural gas unleashed a whole new form of energy. Westinghouse was an inventor extraordinaire. Starting at age 19, he was granted 362 patents in his own name over the next 48 years. That's an average of about 1 every 7 weeks. Going the wrong way here. As much a prolific and gifted inventor, Westinghouse was also a visionary industrialist, an innovative entrepreneur, although he had no formal education or training. Starting with little more than an ambition and an idea, he founded Westinghouse Air Brake in 1869, followed by Union Switch and Signal in 1881, then the Philadelphia Gas Company in 1884, and Westinghouse Electric in 1886. That's what you were referring to. All told, Westinghouse started more than 50 other enterprises over his years, many of which still survive today in one form or another, several as Fortune 500 companies. Furthermore, based on the business principles Westinghouse instilled in these businesses, they continue to evolve and innovate long after his death in 1914. We recently just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the first commercial radio broadcast. Westinghouse companies pioneered radio and television broadcasting, and that was the last slide. So the next slide is sorry about that. Westinghouse was also a progressive humanist and humanistic industrialist. He was the nation's first employer to implement 9-hour workdays, 55-hour work weeks, and then half days every Saturday. He paid higher wages to get the best craftsmen and engineers, and he built his plants around safe working conditions. He was also a pioneer in providing educational, cultural, and housing opportunities for his employees and their families. And these are 2 residences in the town of Wilmerding, which he built entirely to handle Westinghouse Air Brake and then later Westinghouse Electric. Indeed, there was never a strike at any Westinghouse company while he was in charge. So revered was he by his employees that for 15 years after his death, 30,000 of them chipped in to erect a monument to honor his memory. And you've seen this in Shenley Park. Westinghouse gave the world power to do great things. Now here I want to read a quote from historian James Van Trump, who wrote, "There's no doubt that Westinghouse was a great man, possibly the greatest who ever lived in Pittsburgh, and certainly greater than the business or financial wizards who manipulated other men's ideas. Perhaps he might be better called an inspired mechanic of almost divine proportions, a messiah of the mechanistic 19th century. What was in his mind and what emerged from his hand turned miraculously into devices that have helped transform the world."
Thanks. Well, David, that was an interesting presentation. I think I'm most impressed, not just by his patents, but by how much he respected and supported his employees. And that's just so important, especially, and it's relevant today even, so.
More so than ever, it's very relevant. And, it's amazing how many people in this area have a Westinghouse affiliation, or their uncle, their father, it's just so many people have been or touched by Westinghouse. So
yeah, and we have the Westinghouse Electric building in our miniature railroad and village, the original
right,
one. Yes.
right.
But you also mentioned Westinghouse Park, the former site of his home. What do people see when they go there? It's a public park, right?
It's a public park, and here's the picture. It's situated in the Point Breeze
Wait,
North
go back. I want
neighborhood.
to see the picture.
Okay.
Too fast. Okay.
That's the sign, and there's a playground there, and back on the right side you can see the park building, and so there's a lot going on. So, but it's a beautiful park, and it's situated, this is Penn Avenue, but it's right next to the railroad tracks. So, for a century, and this is the Google shot of the park today. You can see it's North Lang Avenue on the left and Thomas Boulevard and on the top, Mertland on the bottom, and then you can't really see it here, but if I go back, you can see there's the railroad tracks on the back on the lower side
Is
here.
that Point Breeze then?
Well, it is technically Point Breeze North, but it was all part of what was originally Homewood. So, and Homewood, for folks who don't know it, was the estate of William Wilkins, which was over here on the other side of Penn Avenue. But you can see on this map, you can see Penn Avenue in yellow, and you can see the tracks, which were actually built just 12 years before Westinghouse moved in. Okay. So let's see so this was his house, Solitude, and he and his house and his wife, Marguerite, they're shown here. This is probably from 10 years after they had it. This is Marguerite's sister in the picture with George. And these were taken in Paris when they were over there on a trip, I imagine. So, but this will tell you when he bought the house originally, you can see the tracks, and there was a 5-acre parcel, and there's a road across that's is McPherson Street, And then so the house was a surprise for Marguerite. They were living in Allegheny City at the time, and he wanted to, get her a house that was out of the hustle and bustle of downtown, and this was, still pretty rural back in those days. So this map, I think, is from like 1875. So, and here's a map from a few years later when he actually bought a lot more property around. You can see this is the time when he has the whole 10 acres of the park, and you can see the house, and there's a stable building. And here I can show you a couple of pictures of the estate as it looked. This is the house. So it was a pretty grand house.
Mhm.
And these are the grounds. Now you can see there's a tower there in the center. That was a powerhouse that he had built behind his stables. To the right there's the original stables. And here you can see back towards the house. And he had this building. This is the stable building, which you could see in the earlier map with that tower smokestack in the back. And underneath here, he had a suite of private tile-lined workshops that was his sort of inner sanctum. And so he could go back and forth between the house and the grounds, the house and the stable building. He had a tunnel built. So this tunnel is 220 feet long, and it's brick lined, as you can see, and it's got a cement floor. And this is after the house was torn down, and the end of the construction rubble is there, but the tunnel is entirely intact. So that's cool. So at any rate, I'm getting off of my. So at any rate, and he had also right next at the Homewood rail station. This isn't a picture of that, but this is a picture of his private rail car, which was called the Glen Eyre. And this was how he would get around the country. He would just pop down, and I'll see it in another picture, but it was literally right by his front door. So during the 4 decades Westinghouse lived and worked at Solitude, numerous notable politicians, industrialists, and scientists were regular guests, including President McKinley, and then there's Britain's Lord Kelvin, who's shown here. And then the next slide is Nikola Tesla, the AC electricity theorist, actually lived at Solitude for 6 months while he and Westinghouse worked out the principles of an engine to use AC electricity. Excuse me. So in addition to those folks, we had H.J. Hines, who was a neighbor, and Henry Frick, who was a neighbor. And Westinghouse came in 1871. Frick came in Clayton, which is now the Frick Art Museum. They came there and bought that property originally in 1884. And Westinghouse and Hines started to create his estate in 1892, just for a little bit of. So Westinghouse was already there for 20 years. Meanwhile, Marguerite became a grand dame and held parties and soirees and all sorts of things going on. And but really, the most significant thing that happened at Westinghouse Park was the Westinghouse had 3 gas wells drilled in the property, and one of which was he had a huge pocket of natural gas, and he hit this gusher, and it spewed gas. He didn't know how to cap wells. People didn't know how to cap wells at that time, so he had to figure out how to cap the well. And then within several weeks, he was able to figure out how to actually distribute the gas, and he piped it to the neighbors' mansions. And so it was, all the beginning really of the commercial natural gas industry that started right there at Solitude. So this is the historical marker that we have at the corner at the park now, and which explains basically what I just said. So, so at any rate, both George and Marguerite died in 1914. He died in March and she died in June. And so Solitude was bequeathed to their only child, George III. And 4 years later, actually, the property was deeded through the Western Pennsylvania Engineers Society, which acquired it from the estate and then deeded to the public, to the city as a public park and as supposedly a memorial to Westinghouse. And this is an ad for the deconstruction sale that they had, which gives you a sense of the kinds of properties that, the kinds of things that Solitude had, mahogany and walnut rooms, and it, and then they sold everything and just collapsed the house into the basement. And then in the mid 60s, the stable building was torn down again and replaced by this present cement block structure. So really, to answer your question earlier, the only thing you can see above ground now at Solitude there are 3 pairs of stone pillars at the old entrances, and there are some steps back by where the railroad tracks are, and there's a tunnel under Lang Street that goes to Westinghouse's station. So that's and a lot of the trees that have been planted. So earlier, the only thing you can sorry, there's a tunnel. So anyway, that is below ground. There is another matter.
Okay. Well, Solitude's been a city park for over a century now, and it's such a shame that they had to tear down that building. I mean, but at least the park is there, and that's exciting. What's happening for the future of the park? Are there any plans to develop it in any way that recreate some of the cool things that were on there in the past? Or
no, not recreates the cool things, but there are lots of plans, and I'm glad you asked that question. 2 years ago, we organized the Westinghouse Park Second Century Coalition to sort of, as kind of a parks conservancy for Westinghouse Park, to take over and to help the city develop and manage the property to both as a park and as a historic site. So we do have now as a website where there's a lot of information about Westinghouse and about the park, and we have a Facebook page that we're sharing information that is going on. But the big news really is this association that we formed with the North Point Breeze Development Corporation, and we've got a grant from this URA, and this is really underway right now. And it's a very collaborative project that's working with the city. There are 4 key elements to it: relaxation, and comfort and use of the park by the residents and the neighborhoods around it, the historic and cultural significance, and one element of that is researching where the house and the foundation of the laboratories were, and the tunnel, and really we know that there's a lot of material that's still there that is of great archaeological importance. So that part of what we want to do is to examine that. And also we're in the process now of obtaining historic designation for the park on the National Registry of Historic Places. So in addition to that, we're providing ongoing stewardship for the park's 170 trees. We've had a new survey done, and we know all the trees. There are a bunch of trees that were actually planted by Westinghouse at the estate 140 years ago. And in fact, we're working with the city to have the park recognized as an arboretum, ideally in time for the Dodren's bicentennial of George Westinghouse on October 6, 2021.
did you say Dodren's bicentennial? That's a long word.
That is a long word, and it means the 175th anniversary of his birth.
Okay.
We're calling it, yeah, we're calling it Westinghouse 175. In addition to the park and the Arboretum, we're going to mark the occasion with a range of activities in the park and beyond. Westinghouse 175, the first event now scheduled, COVID allowing, is Quantum Theater is going to be doing the world premiere of a musical called The Current Wars, which is written by the same screenwriter, actually was written by the same screenwriter of, there was a movie just last fall called The Current War. And before that was a movie, he wrote it as a musical originally, Michael Mitnick, who's a Pittsburgher. And so Quantum Theater is going to kick off Westinghouse 175 with production under a tent in the park. And so that's the first thing that's going to happen. And there are a lot of other things that are in discussion. And, what we want to do is to recognize not only the enormous impact that George Westinghouse had on the world and the history of modern civilization, but what a remarkably human and humane person he was.
Mm-hmm. Hey, we have a question from Mary Ruth. Thanks, Mary Ruth. Is there an existing archaeology from the site? What more do you think you'll find?
Well, there was a test dig that was done by Christine Davis, who is she has a company that does archaeological work all around the state and around the country. And she did a test dig on the corner of where the foundation of the house was. And they found over 1,000 items in a 4 by 8 foot dig that basically just went down through the sod and into the dirt. So there is a lot of material. I've been into the tunnel and there are these big Westinghouse light bulbs in there. And who knows?
Are there household items like pots and pans and
there's
things?
Pots and pans. Well, I don't know what we have found are some cookware and not cookware, but dinnerware. There are pieces of stained glass, not just shards, but actual cut pieces of stained glass.
Wow.
There are cornices, and in the foundation of the laboratory, in the foundation of the stable where the laboratories are, we have no idea what's in there. So we can't find out until we dig. We did a ground penetrating radar survey of the whole park, and there's all kinds of stuff that remains to be discovered.
Hey, David, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear about that. We'll have you back on when you can show us the slide presentation of all the different artifacts that you find.
Yeah, well,
it's all done.
So people are interested, go to westinghousepark.org.
Okay. Thanks so much all, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Okay, and thank you.
A safe one. Okay.